Tennessee Orange will take over Nashville on Saturday as the Vols open the season against Virginia in an 11 o'clock local time kickoff in Nashville. That's 12 Eastern. You can watch the Tennessee probably open the season with a win and then celebrate out at the Honky Tonks. That would be the ideal situation for Vols fans. Welcome in to the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside Adam Sparks and John Adams of the Knoxville News Sentinel. Guys, the Vols are a 28.5-point favorite. I mentioned you can head out to the bars afterwards. Judging by that line, you could head out at halftime. Is it going to be that easy for Tennessee? Here in week one, I know Virginia wasn't very good last year.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this is part of it's Virginia was not good last year. I think a lot of this too is that people feel like it's the norm now that Tennessee will score 50 points against mediocre competition. Because they did it last year. Obviously, they were the highest scoring offense in the country, but they were scoring about 40 points a game in the first year under Josh Heupel, and that was sort of piecemeal together, that offense. They didn't have all the personnel. They hadn't been together, and still they were scoring a ton of points. So it's kind of a given that Tennessee's going to score 50. Now, we can talk about how that could maybe not happen because of what you're having to piece together and some guys out and all that. But that's why that line is so big. It's that they just figure that Tennessee's offense can sort of pick a score and get to it.
Yeah, Blake and I talked about it on our SEC podcast. As you said, Adam, mediocre teams, Tennessee just can overwhelm and just keep scoring. Virginia had a horrible offense last year, Tony Elliott's first season, and it really doesn't look much better on paper this year. Got a quarterback from Monmouth. Repeat that. A quarterback from Monmouth is now your starter. So I don't think that bears further analysis.
Tony Muskett, right?
That's the one.
Monmouth quarterback.
Monmouth, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so many teams are starting transfers these days, but normally when you're a Power 5 program, you're hoping to get another Power 5 quarterback or maybe, a group of 5 all-conference performer. You're reaching pretty deep into the well, I feel like, when you're getting your starting quarterback from Monmouth. What do you know about Tony Muskett, Adam? What's in store for the Vols defense there from the Rifleman?
Almost nothing. He can almost. I didn't say nothing. I said almost nothing. He actually is a little bit of a dual threat. He can run and throw. I'll tell you this. In my answer, where I said almost nothing, earlier today we had a Josh Heupel in the press conference, and he was asked about the quarterback, and then Tim Banks, the defensive coordinator for UT, was asked the same question a few days ago, and both of their answers was also almost nothing. It was no disrespect to that player, to that quarterback, but you could tell they're sort of focused on them. And I say all that to say I'm very focused on Tennessee.
Are they already game planning for like an October 14th game against Texas A&M or something?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is that Virginia's offense will be, I think, actually better than it was last year in terms of just having an identity. Everything that I saw Virginia last year, they just didn't know what they were. So I think the offense could be a little better. It's going to be a Tennessee crowd. It'll be an orange crowd. So they'll have that against them. They have the new quarterback. They'll have that against them. I actually think Tennessee's defense is going to play reasonably well in this game. I think there's a chance Tennessee's defense could look better than its offense at times in this game. So if Tennessee does win by the line that's predicted that they'll do it, I think it'll be more balanced. I don't think it's because Tennessee will necessarily just score 50. I think the defense is going to play pretty well.
At today's press conference, on Monday, you had Danico Slaughter and Aaron Beasley, 2 defensive players for the Vols, and one of them, I forgot which one, was asked about Virginia's quarterback, and they said he's a good decision maker. So that's something to hang your hat on. And Adams called him a dual threat guy, sort of a dual threat guy, run or pass. Is it really, when you think about it, everybody is a dual threat guy? I mean, you can run a little bit, you can run and you can throw the ball. So essentially you're a dual threat guy.
I don't know,
You can be
John.
you can be a triple threat if you pitch the ball. That's what Georgia Tech did for years.
After covering the Jarrett Garantano era, there is such a thing as a zero threat quarterback as well. So, yeah, I don't know if everybody's a dual threat. Some are fortunate to be a one threat. Well, Adam, you mentioned that Tennessee's focus is on them doing what they do. So let's turn the attention away from Virginia specifically and put the mirror on Tennessee. What are some things that we think we need to see from Tennessee in this opener? If Tennessee is going to have a big encore season to what was the best Tennessee season in 20 plus years last year, what sort of signs do you think we need to see right out of the gates here Saturday?
Well, I think you have to take the season in stages, and for them to get out of the first month unscathed, they're going to have to beat Florida. We know that's the first big game that'll be coming up, as long as they can survive this one. What tells me that they're going to be okay at Florida is if the center position is filled adequately, if they're efficient on offense. A lot is being said about Cooper Mays this week, and he had a medical procedure. He's been out of practice. They listed him on the depth chart as the starter. I don't think he's going to be available to play. I don't think they're going to say one way or another publicly before the game, but that's a critical position. It's not just an offensive lineman. Cooper Mays makes that offense go. Their tempo, you would think, is going to be slower with that Cooper Mays out there. Their efficiency is not going to be good. They're not going to pass protect as well with him not out there. And so if Ollie Lane, who is probably going to be the guy to fill in at center, if he can go in and keep them on time, at least in terms of their tempo, and the offense can run efficiently, then you can say, okay, with or without Cooper Mays, they could be okay at Florida. And if you win at Florida, then you're talking about, then you get Cooper Mays. Then Cooper Mays is at full strength, either that game or after that. And then you can start talking about a top 10 team again. I know they're ranked that now, but there's so much on how they replace Cooper Mays in this game. And if they can't replace him, that's going to be a big problem. And we're basically going to ask for the next 2 weeks, is he going to be okay against Florida? Is he going to be back for Florida? And I don't know the answer to that. I think Ollie Lane will be serviceable. But even with that, you're taking your guard and moving him to center. Then you're plugging in a guy that wasn't supposed to be starting at guard. You got a guy that wasn't supposed to be playing at center. And you've got a new tackle. There's a lot of things that could go wrong on that offensive line. I just want to see the offense run efficiently and fast.
Well, Josh Heupel will not offer any clues on injury, because today he was talking about, well, just kind of look at it later in the week. I think Adam's right. There's no chance Cooper Mays is playing this week or next week. And we don't even know if he'll play against Florida, because, we've heard it before where somebody, well, he's kind of out indefinitely, or, week by week we'll check and guy just disappears. So it's interesting, though, with the number one scoring team in the country based on last year, that going into an opener, that the center is a big topic of discussion. You know how there aren't many podcasts that are geared around a center. But it's fair to do that.
Well, I'll steer things away from the center then and throw out one more. Something I think I need to see to believe that Tennessee is primed for a big encore is pass coverage. Right now, we talked about how Virginia has the transfer quarterback from Monmouth, and Virginia was one of the worst passing offenses in the ACC last year. They were one of the worst offenses, period, and that also applied to their pass game. So a lockdown performance by Tennessee's secondary does not necessarily tell me that Tennessee is going to be locking down SEC pass games. However, the opposite of that, I think, would be concerning. If Virginia comes out on Saturday in Nashville and throws for 300 yards, then that tells me that this is going to be a lingering problem. It was the softest part of Tennessee's team last year, was its pass defense. And so, no, shutting down Virginia won't tell me all of a sudden the Vols have the number one defense in the land. It will tell me there's a chance that unit could be improved this year. And it would be concerning if Virginia lights up that secondary in week 1.
Yeah, I don't think Tim Banks, the D coordinator, is going to be as concerned with passing yards allowed. I think he'll be concerned of how they're allowed and when they're allowed. We've talked about this before, but we do have in our minds that somehow the defense was bad last year. Well, they gave up 400 passing yards in like 3 or 4 different games. They were near the worst in pass defense in the country. Yes, but the Clemson game was a defensive win. The Kentucky game was a defensive win. LSU game, to some extent, was a defensive win. Vandy was a shutout. There were 3 or 4 games last year that Tennessee's defense was just as integral to the win as their offense. And the games that they did that in, they were okay giving up yards if they had to, but they were bringing the house. They were aggressive. They got in the backfield. They took chances. They were risky. And I asked Aaron Beasley about that today, and I asked him to describe the identity of this defense, and he said uber aggressive. And I think that's true. Sometimes they got burned last year doing that, especially look at the South Carolina game. But other games, it worked out, like the games that I mentioned. And Virginia may throw for some yards in this game, but I think it's sacks, it's TFLs, it's quarterback hurries, it's turnovers, and those sort of things that they're going to be that Tennessee is going to aim for more than just what the passing yards give up, how many passing yards they give up.
I think if Monmouth transfer quarterback Tony Muskett throws for 2 touchdowns, somebody on the defensive staff should have a panic attack. I think that would be a really bad sign.
Yeah, and aggressive or not aggressive against conference opponents last year, the only pass defense in the SEC that was worse than Tennessee's was Vanderbilt. And you can look at it any way you want to, like yards allowed, completion percentage. The opponents were completing a high percentage of their pass, quarterback rating. SEC quarterbacks had a great rating against Tennessee. Touchdown to interception ratio. I mean, whatever category you want. And to the point of the aggressive defense, that might have been a winning strategy at times last year, but you take Byron Young off that pass rush, and I question whether you're going to be able to hang your hat on that as much this year. And yeah, against LSU, Byron Young had 2.5 sacks, had 2 sacks against Clemson. If you told me there was another Byron Young running around out there, then maybe I'd think, okay, they can paper over the pass defense a little bit, but shy of producing another him, I think that unit has to be better.
Well, and I wonder if there's any factor in this game of the continuously running clock. I'm trying to remember all the different clock rules we have, but it's some incomplete passes. The clock will still run. Anyway, from the first week games, the week 0 games, I think possessions were squeezed a little bit. There were fewer possessions. I don't think that's going to affect Tennessee that much on offense, but I think it could affect the other side of the ball, where Virginia will try to, if they get a first down, they're going to milk it more than they would have otherwise, because they're trying to take away at least a possession from Tennessee. So I wouldn't be surprised if that comes into play. And if it does, that means Tennessee's defense is going to have to be much better on third down than they were at times last year. They were solid last year, but not as good as they should be. They're going to have to be good on third down so they can get the ball back to their offense, so they can run up the score. If you don't have enough possessions, you're not going to be getting up into the 40s and 50s, and that's going to rely as much on defense getting off the field as it will the offense.
When you go back to Tennessee's defensive struggles last year, they invariably were against really good quarterbacks. I mean, they had some decent games defensively, but the really good quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson at Florida. I'm missing somebody. Stetson Bennett before they shut down the offense. All those guys just destroyed Tennessee's defense. So I don't think we can learn much from the defense against Virginia, because the offense is just so lacking in talent, experience too, that, if you pitch a shutout against a Tony Muskett-led offense, I don't think that turns heads.
The problem we have to look at in a game like this too is if Tennessee wins by a considerable margin, this and really the Austin P game both, we're going to have these narratives, and you guys know as well as I do, we're going to have narratives that come out of this game that don't necessarily translate to SEC games later on. So, it's going to be Tennessee's going to get enough sacks that you're going to say, okay, well, Byron Young, lost Byron Young. Looks like they've replaced him. They're going to have a lot of guys playing the secondary. So they're going to say, hey, that secondary's getting a lot better. And look how deep it is. There's a difference between depth and good depth. Joe Milton is going to throw the ball well to at least 3, 4, 5 receivers because they will roll some other guys in if the score gets out of hand. And so then we're going to say, well, it looks like this receiving core has expanded more. And so there's going to be a lot of narratives. I'm just warning fans that there's going to be a lot of narratives that come out of this game that may hold, but there's as many that probably will not hold by the time they get to SEC play. These games, these early season games in non-conference can get a little squirrely in that way.
We've seen elsewhere in the SEC, we'll see some marquee games. LSU, Florida State tops the list. South Carolina playing North Carolina. You got Florida playing Utah. This is, I guess you could call it, Tennessee's marquee non-conference game. Tennessee was originally scheduled to play BYU on the road. They canceled that game. This game takes its place. You have to go back quite a ways, I think, to find a marquee non-conference opponent as weak as this one for Tennessee. I mean, maybe you could say that 2017 season with Georgia Tech, that actually wound up being a fantastic game. It was one of the best games of the season. As it turned out, neither Georgia Tech nor Tennessee were very good that year. We just didn't know that in week one. But, there's real no denying that Virginia is probably one of the weaker teams in the ACC. It certainly was last year. Is there any, I guess, potential backfiring for Tennessee starting the season with an opponent like this? Would they be better served by playing, say, like a North Carolina, like South Carolina is doing, by playing a Utah? Or is this all upside for Tennessee because, barring a disaster, they're not losing this game? So despite the fact they may not get tested in week one, they're better off this way.
Yeah, they need a running start into the season, and they don't need a roadblock into the season. And I like this level of opponent. I actually like this level of opponent for Tennessee in just about any year. A Power 5, a low end Power 5 team. I mean, if you play a really good Group of 5 team, you could get beat because really good Group of 5 teams are better than lower end Power 5 teams. In this case, they're going to play a lower end Power 5 team. It's somebody that has some name recognition. They're in the ACC. You can get a good solid win. You can feel good about yourself, and you can make mistakes in the opener and not get beat because of it. There's so much momentum that's coming from last season, but then I think there are reasonable questions about how guys are replaced on this roster. That you need an adequate opponent that you can win and still make mistakes, and I think that's the level that they have in Virginia.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the last thing Tennessee would want to do is open with the North Carolina and quarterback Drake May. You don't want to test your new secondary against him. So I think this is the way to go, and it looks better when you win against a lower end Power 5 team, as Adam put it, as opposed to if you're playing a MAC opponent. I actually think UConn and Texas San Antonio will give Tennessee a tougher game than Virginia will.
Yeah, UTSA may be ranked when Tennessee plays them. If they win their opener, they'll probably be ranked when they come to Knoxville.
And Connecticut, Jim Morrow Jr. is a really good coach. And he made headway there last year. I just think Virginia's awful.
Isn't it funny, too, that we're talking about Tennessee? I think we're all thinking this, Blake, when you pitched that out of maybe they could be playing like a top 15 team or something early on, like Florida State and LSU are doing. When we're answering that question, we're thinking through, well, they don't want to get tripped up because if you lose a game early like that, you're probably taking yourself out of the playoffs. You're possibly taking yourself out of a New Year's Eve bowl or New Year's Day bowl and a New Year's Six bowl like they went to last year. And that's realistic now for Tennessee. Now, I don't know if Tennessee's going to go 11-1, 10-2, 9-3, 8-4, probably one of those. But all those records are reasonable to think about. And that's different than what they were the season before, certainly 2 seasons before. You would say, well, if they lose a non-conference game, that just means it's going to hurt, whether they're going to a 6-win bowl or a 7-win bowl. Now we think of, well, they can't lose early, because if they lose early, they'll get bumped out of the top 10. Or when the college football playoff rankings come out, they're not going to be in it if they lose early. They've got to win out so that when they get to the Alabama game, they're undefeated. Those are all legitimate thoughts right now, and I think that kind of shows where this program has gone in the last year.
Yeah, I don't think I have much pushback on what you guys are saying, as much as I would, just from a watching the game perspective, I'd like to see probably a better opponent, because I think it'd be more compelling. But from the Tennessee perspective, I don't really have much pushback there. I think what you guys are saying is probably true, that Tennessee's better off playing a Virginia than, say, a Florida State. I wonder, though, if this conversation changes a little bit when the 12-team playoff is here, because the 4-team playoff combined with New Year's Six, it's all about losing the fewest games possible, right? Yeah. I do wonder, like, when the 12-team playoff, you might have 3, 4, maybe even 5 SEC teams making the playoff field in a particular year. And if you're putting your resume up, let's say Tennessee and another SEC team finished the year with the same record, they're vying for the last at-large spot, and the other SEC team, played a ranked Power 5 opponent, and Tennessee, beat the helmets off Virginia by 30 points, but Virginia goes 2-10 this year or something. I do think the conversation might change a little bit when the 12-team playoff's here and we're having these strength of schedule debates. But as far as the 4-team playoff goes, and you even combine the New Year's Six, it really just is about losing as few games as possible for the most part. And so I agree with you guys. I don't think there's a huge, really any downside for Tennessee opening up with an opponent like Virginia.
Well, I think when we go to a 12-team playoff, I think you're going to have trial and error, similar to what you get in the NCAA basketball tournament, of scheduling changes like every 3 or 4 years. How do you approach it? And so there could be a time in that, with approaching it in the way that you're talking about, you need to schedule one really good non-conference to boost your resume at the end of the year. But then the flip side of that, and this is, I think, how it will start more in the 12-team playoff era, is that you will schedule lighter, because your conference schedule is probably what you're going to lean on mostly, especially if the SEC if the SEC conference schedule gets expanded. You're going to get to the playoff based on what you do in conference, not out of conference. And so I think most teams will shy away from scheduling tough opponents out of conference.
Blake, do you think Tennessee could have found an easier Power 5 non-conference matchup opponent than
who's
Virginia?
Who's Northwestern playing for their Power 5? They got Duke. I just pulled it up. Northwestern's got the Dukies. Yeah, you could have scheduled Northwestern and probably found a weaker opponent there. Maybe 1 or 2 others, but the list gets pretty short pretty quickly, I think.
We're really discounting Virginia.
Yeah, put it on the bulletin board.
Yeah, rightfully so, Adam.
They do have some pieces coming back on defense, and they were decent in the portal. And I'll just speak up for the Cavaliers here. I think they could be. I think they can be competitive defensively, and I don't know. I mean, a year later, their offense will be, maybe they're adequate. I actually think they'll be competitive on defense.
Adam, I got the preseason media poll in front of me. For whatever it's worth, in the 14-team ACC, Virginia was picked to finish 14th, and it wasn't close. The number 13 team had almost twice as many voting points as Virginia, so they were pretty solidly 14th on most of those ballots, I'd say. But maybe the media is just sleeping on the Cavies.
Well, I've got an Athlon's preseason magazine here, and where do you think it had Virginia in the ACC?
Solidly 14th.
Solidly 14th, yeah. But Adam, I appreciate Virginia fans will appreciate. I know, but I admire that counterpoint. They could be competitive on defense.
Season openers also are quirky, and this is good. This is not going to be in Neyland. This will be in Nashville. All I'm saying is I don't think it's going to be 28-0 at the end of the first quarter.
It might be 35-0 at the end of the first quarter.
Hey, how many Virginia fans will travel to Nashville for this game?
Yeah, not many. Yeah, I mean this will be all orange.
You're fighting a lonely march here.
Yeah, he's like at the Alamo waving a
well,
flag.
This is the typical. You guys have experienced this before. I've been a college beat writer for 20 years, something like that. And when you get to, there's stages in fall camp that you go through where you look at the team you're covering and say, this team's going to be pretty good. And they plug this hole and that hole. And I saw this guy at practice and this guy looks bigger and all this sort of stuff. And then you go through a latter stage of fall camp. And when you get to game week, you start to, those same things start to sandbag in your mind. Well, I don't know. It's Cooper Mays and, yeah, the last game they did beat Clemson in the Orange Bowl, but they punted like 7 times that game. The offense was good. It wasn't great, which by the way is the truth. They've got the secondary wasn't very good last year. The opener 2 years ago against Bowling Green, they did not come out well. That was a close game at the half. You start to think through these things of what could go wrong more than what could go right. So I suppose that's where my thinking is. I'm in the sandbag, the team that I cover this close to game time.
Adam, you raised a question with our audience when you said you've been covering this for 20 years.
College football, not Tennessee.
Yeah, I know, but people look at you and think you're 25. So I just want to explain that you look really young for your age. You weren't covering college games when you were 5 years old.
Maybe 25 as compared to you, John. I don't think I'd put Adam at 25.
Press box in the 3rd grade, John. That's accurate.
Yeah, Adam, I hear what you're saying there. I did some of the same stuff on the beat. You get close to the season after seeing a team all preseason, and you start to see all their flaws.
All
and
the
you notice
warts. Yep.
Yeah. Imagine, though, if you were covering Virginia's preseason camp, coming off the heels of Virginia's last game last year. You mentioned how many times Tennessee had to punt against Clemson. The last time out, Virginia, they lost by 30 points to Pittsburgh.
Okay. Okay. You're convincing me.
Do you think Tennessee studied film of Monmouth from last year, or video from Monmouth?
I think they referenced that, today, didn't they, John? Or maybe Tim Banks said that.
I didn't stick around for – I'd heard enough before Tim Banks showed up, so I didn't know. But you usually do that if it's a quarterback but Monmouth, I assume they video their games.
They're on YouTube. I'm sure they're on YouTube.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so one of the 7 fans that show up to that game, I think he had like a little Coca-Cola sized camera, and they've probably been breaking down all that film all off season. Well, we've provided plenty of bulletin board material for Virginia. Adam was fighting the good fight, and we'll see if Virginia can live up to the test. Tennessee, 28.5-point favorite. That kickoff will be Saturday in Nashville. You can find the coverage throughout the week and on game day from Adam over at knoxnews.com. John will have the commentary throughout the week and at the buzzer, and we will be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Volunteer State.